Hi. So what I wanted to talk to you first of all was about my journey with thyroid disorder. Many years ago I actually discovered that I had a multinodular goiter, and it was around the time I was breastfeeding my son Dion, and I went to the doctors, and at the time they said I needed a thermonuclear scan and that I would need to stop breastfeeding so that they could do the scan to determine what needed to be done, whether or not I needed medication or in fact to have the goiter removed. I made a decision back then not to actually do anything because a thermonuclear scan sounded pretty dangerous to me. So I kept breastfeeding my son, and I watched my diet as much as I knew how. In those days we didn't have the internet, we didn't have Dr. Google to have a look. I was living in the middle of the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia in a very, very remote town called Lock. And I was fairly isolated, but I just listened to my intuition and I adjusted my diet, and I attempted to heal myself, I guess, of this multinodular goiter. I have absolutely no idea why or how that happened, and it was quite enlarged and engorged at the time. But I do know that when I actually stopped breastfeeding my son Dion, then the goiter actually disappeared. At least I thought it disappeared. It disappeared so that I could no longer see it. Tests revealed years later that of course it was still there, and ultrasound. Anyhow, I have always experienced fairly good health, although when I was younger I did seem to be very reactive to gluten, and so at the age of about 23 I actually gave up gluten altogether, and pretty much at the same time I gave up dairy as well. My health was reasonably good, and I ate sugars and I drank alcohol and I lived a fairly normal life. I did try to be as vegetarian as I possibly could. I had a go at being vegan at one stage, but that didn't really suit my body. So for the most part of my 20s and 30s, I was mostly vegetarian, plant-based. Sometimes I'd eat a little bit of organic chicken, and certainly ate fish. But my health was fairly good. I did notice though, and I remember going to the hairdresser saying to me that he thought that something was going on with my health because I would lose quite a lot of hair. And to be honest, I actually thought that was because I didn't brush my hair very often. I would tend to get up in the morning, rub my fingers through my hair and not actually even use a hairbrush. And I feel very fortunate that my hair was always healthy and full and vibrant, and I didn't really need to be dragging a brush through it every day. But it turns out that I was losing a lot of hair actually. I was also experiencing in my late 30s and 40s a lot of what I would say was hormonal imbalances. So I would go to the doctors and ask them to check my hormones, and they'd give me a blood test and they'd say my hormones were fine. And this was kind of frustrating because I knew that something was going on behind the scenes, but I couldn't actually work out what it was. I persevered over the years and I would have sort of weird things going on with my eyes. I'd have flickering going on and dizziness and just a general sense of not feeling quite well. And I couldn't put my finger on it, and neither could the doctors, until one day I was actually alerted to the fact that the Medicare in Australia, for example, when they test your blood for a thyroid disorder, they don't automatically do the full test, the TSH test. They do a screening type test that doesn't actually give very much information, to be honest. So for many years I'd been having my thyroid checked because I felt like I had all the symptoms of thyroiditis, yet the doctors were saying that my thyroid was perfect. So I went to the doctors and I actually asked them to run a proper TSH. They told me that it was going to cost more money, and I agreed to pay them more money, and lo and behold I got a result back to say that my thyroid was imbalanced. And that gave me a lot of relief because I realized that something had not been quite right. I'd been super tired in the afternoons by this stage, and really even feeling like I couldn't even drag myself through the rest of the day. Again, lots of hair falling out, and pretty much if you had a look at the premenopausal symptoms, that's what I was displaying. And in fact, many doctors or people that I'd spoken to had actually suggested that that was what was going on. I knew my mother hadn't actually gone through menopause until her mid-50s, and when she did, she didn't really have any dramas with them. She was quite well. Some of the other symptoms that I had were I had endometriosis, I had fibroids, I had lipomas under my skin that I'd had to get removed. Yeah, so a whole raft of symptoms that just weren't really making sense to me, at least. I'm not a medical practitioner, but something inside me told me that things weren't quite right. So I went down the rabbit hole of investigating hypothyroidism and the effects on the body. And it turns out that hypothyroidism can actually be caused by low iodine in the diet. So interestingly enough, in Australia, New Zealand and America, the women actually have the lowest volumes of iodine in our diet of anybody in the world, and perhaps closely connected to that is we also have the highest rates of breast cancer, endometriosis, lipomas, and fibromas in the world as well. So you can make the connection there. But I certainly started to become concerned about the lack of iodine in our diet. Back in the 1960s, I believe, there was a illness called cretinism, I think you could call it an illness, where they realized that babies' brains weren't being formed correctly because of a lack of iodine. So what they actually did is they put iodine into the table salt, and everybody ate iodized table salt, and that was helping these babies from not being born with cretinism. Of course, what it also did was actually introduce some iodine into our very depleted diets. But you know, not long after that, and I think it was in the 70s, somebody came along and said salt is no good for you. So off the table came the salt, and then our iodine levels dropped again to virtually nothing. Interesting fact here is that the Medicare tests in Australia of how they measure or what they test for in a thyroid test is still based on a standard measure that was used in the late 60s by the American Medical Association, and they use that as a guideline then, and they use it as a guideline now. So unless you've actually seriously got something going on with your thyroid, it's not going to show in a thyroid screening test. It's very, very unlikely. So you have to be aggressive with the doctors and demand to get further testing of your thyroid. That's just a little aside. What I wanted to say is that in Japan, for example, the average amount of iodine that a woman has in her diet is 12.5 milligrams. Not micrograms, milligrams, which is a lot, and obviously they get it from seafood and seaweed and other products, and certainly the soil in Japan actually holds iodine in it. In the West, we don't have any iodine left in our soil because of the leaching of toxic chemicals in the soil. And the other thing that we don't have is selenium. Selenium actually helps us to hold on to any iodine that may come into our body, and because we don't have selenium in our food, it's actually almost impossible for us to hold on to any iodine. So if you were taking an iodine supplement, for example, or iodized table salt, because you don't have any selenium in your diet, or you probably won't be actually holding on to any of that iodine. So iodine is something that all women should be looking into and getting some sort of an iodine supplement, also with selenium in it. But you need to go and see a practitioner. You need to go and see somebody that understands this. In Australia, we have a clinic called the Lucy Rose Clinic, and they can actually guide you and help you to actually even come off your thyroid medication or to support it. The problem with the thyroid medication is that it is synthetic, and you need to keep adjusting the doses, and over time it will actually stop working. Another symptom that I was suffering from was my metabolism stopped working. I was virtually eating absolutely nothing, and I was just getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And it was frustrating me. It was making me unhappy in myself, in my marriage, in my relationships. It was making me feel that I couldn't go to the beach in my bathers. I was very self-conscious. And basically what was happening is my metabolism just wasn't working. So it actually, after all of my little investigation into this with the doctors and recognizing that I had hyperthyroidism, sorry about the bike, one of the beauties of living in Canggu. So I actually started to go to the Lucy Rose Clinic, and I got on top of my thyroid, and I started to lose weight, and my appetite returned, and I felt healthier, and I felt a lot more alive. My hair stopped falling out. Things were going super well for me. Because I was feeling so well, I did what many people do. I slipped off the wagon a little. I was drinking a bit of alcohol, red wine and such, and probably eating a bit too much sugar. Still being gluten-free and dairy-free, but certainly having too much sugar in my diet. So I actually started to regress and get quite sick again over the next few years. I went back for retesting, and I found that I was actually it slipped over the hypothyroidism markers into Hashimotos, and I was becoming very, very ill. Hashimotos is an autoimmune disease. It's when your hypothyroidism has gone crazy. So what actually happens with hypothyroidism is that your thyroid starts to not recognize the proteins that are coming in and attacking them, and apparently even attacking itself. I'm not really sure on that science. I know that medical medium talks a lot about the fact that the body will never attack itself. It's always in a healing state given the right circumstances. So I would probably prefer to say that I wasn't giving my body the right set of circumstances to heal. Once I discovered that I had Hashimoto's, obviously I was quite concerned, and I did not want a death certificate or a certificate for me that said the rest of my life I was going to have an autoimmune disease. So I decided to do something quite aggressive about it. I quit all sugar, I quit all alcohol, I quit all dairy, I quit stress, I quit my job, I quit my life. I actually moved to Bali. And in the last 2 years, I've managed to completely recover from Hashimoto's. What I want to do though is to talk to people about the symptoms of early menopause and the symptoms of hypothyroidism. If you draw up a table, which I've done, and I'm really happy to share with anybody, if you like, you can send me your email address and I will send it to you. If you get the symptoms, the full symptoms of a chart of menopause, and you get the full symptoms of a chart of hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's in the early stages, you will see that they almost overlay exactly. And so this makes it very, very difficult for your GP, bless them, to diagnose you. A lot of women are going to their GP, and I hear about this in their 20s, and they say you are early menopausal. I would like to argue that you are not. I would like to argue that if you come to these countries where they do not have excessive GMO foods or soy or sugars or a poor diet and stress in their lives, that they actually sail through menopause quite without the symptoms, and certainly, yes, the bleeding stops, but for about the most part, that's it. Even when I actually moved here and changed my diet and my lifestyle, my hot flushes actually stopped as well. And I can tell you that every time I go back to Australia, step into the same lifestyle that I had before, which is drinking and socializing and eating really crap food, I get the hot flashes again. So there's definitely, for me personally, a deep relationship between that. But I want everyone to be aware of that. Just because you hit sort of 45 or 50 and you start to get a little bit thicker in the middle, and you start to get tired, you start to lose your hair, you get a little bit over emotional, all of the things that they will tell you are related to early menopause, please do not believe it. There is something else going on with your body, and it is reacting to the environment that you are in and the environment that you continue to throw at your body. So reducing sugars, reducing gluten, reducing dairy, remembering that dairy is for cows, not for humans, and reducing stress in your life will make an absolute massive gain to your health. And please listen to your inner voice. If you go to the doctors and they're saying to you that it's early menopause and you're in your 20s or your 30s, even your 40s, question it. Please, I'm begging you, question it. Go to somebody that will give you a full examination of your thyroid, and then see if you can find somebody like the Lucy Rose Clinic or a naturopath that can help you to give you a much more balanced and healthier approach to healing your thyroid. So that's all I've got for now. Again, if you want that overlaying list where I've overlaid all the symptoms of thyroid and menopause, I'm really happy to share it, because it will blow your mind, actually blow your mind, to see how similar the symptoms are. Thanks very much for listening, and I will be back in touch again soon to talk about other ways to heal our body. Cheers.